A Friday morning at Westmore Academy, a prestigious private school where the uniforms cost more than public school tuition, every taunt is coated in the polished veneer of civility. In the walnut-paneled auditorium, a pale golden stage light cast a glow on a small figure, 12-year-old Jaylen Carter, standing still at the center of the vast stage, like a solitary note in the symphony of entitlement and arrogance. A soft ripple of laughter echoed from the third row where Logan Wright, the son of a real estate conglomerate CEO, held up his phone, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Hey guys, the little diva is about to perform," he said loudly enough to trigger more laughter, spreading like dominoes. All eyes turned toward Jaylen, not out of curiosity, but anticipation of a fall. Jaylen knew he had never signed up for the talent show. The form with his signature was forged. A perfect trap had been set not to evaluate talent, but to witness a black boy accidentally step onto the stage, reserved for those born in the glow of inherited spotlight. "The mic is hot, Carter." Principal Bennett's voice rang out thick with artificial sweetness. "Since you are so determined to perform, we're excited." Jaylen swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly. Under the brilliant lights, he could feel the cold radiating from the seats below the chill of prejudice, eager for a public shaming. No one knew his mother was Melody Carter, a soul queen who had won 6 Grammy Awards. But at Westmore, that only earned him more contempt. When they needed concert tickets, she was a legend. When they needed someone to mock, she was that black singer from Oakland. Jaylen looked up. Among the pale faces waiting for him to fail, he saw Logan clutching his phone, ready to capture a funny clip to spread online. What no one knew, not even Jaylen, was that this seemingly humiliating Friday morning would begin a shift in Westmore's long-standing prejudices. Jaylen swallowed again. His throat was parched. Sweat began to gather beneath the perfectly ironed collar of his school shirt. His eyes dropped to the gleaming wooden steps that led off stage one step, and he could return to the invisible shadow he occupied in the classroom. He usually kept quiet when classmates called him that lucky scholarship kid. "We're waiting, Jaylen." Principal Bennett's voice now carried less sweetness. It had a cadence of urgency, an impatient veneer, barely concealing condescension. In the corner of the auditorium, Logan was still smiling. His camera was still recording. He knew his trap had worked, and the little fish was flailing seconds from going still. Jaylen took a deep breath. He could hear his heart pounding in his chest, but deeper than that. There was a flame rising not from anger, but something else. The refusal to have his dignity torn apart by people who had never heard his voice. I didn't prepare anything," Jaylen said softly, but his voice didn't tremble. A wave of soft chuckles spread from the middle rows. Some parents shook their heads. Ms. Lopez, the music teacher, sat in the front row, motionless. Her face expressionless, but her eyes never left Jaylen. "That's unfortunate," Principal Bennett sighed, ready to cue the staff to move on to the next act. "But," Jaylen raised his head, "I can sing something I just thought of." The entire auditorium froze. Ms. Lopez leaned slightly forward. Jaylen took a deep, full breath. His hand reached for the mic, trembling but firm. "This song, my mum wrote it for me when I was little. She's never performed it. No one's ever heard it. She called it Invisible Roots." The audience's demeanor shifted. Whispers stirred. "Is that an unreleased Melody Carter song? Are you serious?" Logan stiffened, his expression shifting from mockery to suspicion. On stage, Jaylen closed his eyes. He remembered the tiny apartment in the old Oakland complex. Remembered his mother cradling him, singing the song to him when he couldn't sleep through the sound of sirens outside the window. That song was blood, it was bone. It was where he belonged. In that moment, Jaylen was no longer a boy at the center of a cruel joke. He was a spark small enough to be dismissed, but strong enough to burn prejudice to the ground. And then he sang. The first note trembled like a boy passing through a dark forest. But then, unexpectedly, after just 2 bars, that voice found its path through memory and instinct. Deep as the breath of the earth, a raw, warm timbre quietly flowed down every row of seats. The air in the auditorium seemed to freeze. The song opened with whispers about roots buried beneath concrete memories, dreams and pain unseen by the world. Jaylen wasn't just singing with his voice, but with his heart. Each word that left his lips felt like it was aching beneath the listeners' chests. They don't see the roots, the ones that hold me when I fall, invisible but unshakable, silent, but they sing for me all. In the 4th row, a white girl who had been filming with her phone slowly lowered it. A few parents leaned forward and conversations ceased. And in the front row, Ms. Lopez, who had once teared up after catching Jaylen humming in the music room after hours, was now clenching her hands tightly on her lap. At 12, Jaylen had no flawless technique, but what his voice carried was something most adults had lost: truth. A raw truth, not needing validation through accolades or lineage, only a melody honest enough to pierce through the many masks below. In the 3rd row, Logan Wright, the architect of this public humiliation, furrowed his brow. His eyes scanned the room. No one was laughing. No one was mocking. The push he had planned didn't happen. The script had broken. Jaylen kept singing, eyes still closed. Images of his mother surfaced, teaching him to read between rehearsals, wiping tears, while telling her son, "You may not have been born in glory, but you can sing to reclaim it." He sang of forgotten ancestors, a bloodline heavy with burden and pride, of invisible roots that quietly held him up when the world tried to knock him down. And one by one, people sat up straighter. They no longer saw Melody Carter's son. They were listening to Jaylen Carter. An independent voice, a story that had never been told. Jaylen opened his eyes as the final lyrics drifted down like a blanket over loneliness. The auditorium remained silent. Not the cold silence from before, but the kind reserved for something sacred. A moment of fragile peace, until a sharp, jarring sound shattered through the speakers like a violent slap. A high-pitched screech ripped through the hall. Then the stage lights began flashing wildly. Over the speakers, an offbeat, abrasive electronic track crashed in loud, discordant, intrusive cutting through the final echoes of the song. Jaylen froze. He didn't need to look to know what had happened. Logan had made his move. At the back of the hall, tucked in the shadows of the control booth, Logan and 2 of his smirking friends had tampered with the sound system. They thought a few buttons would be enough to drag Jaylen through the mud, pull him back to the place they believed he belonged. Beneath them, silent, humiliated. The auditorium fell into confusion. Some chuckled uneasy laughs, caught between doubt and discomfort. A few students raised their phones to record. Logan folded his arms, wearing a triumphant smirk. Jaylen gripped the microphone tightly. He could hear his heartbeat louder than the bass booming through the speakers. In a flash, he thought of his mother, of his godfather, Jerome Matthews, who once told him accidents aren't the enemy of music. They're a test for real artists. And then Jaylen closed his eyes again. He didn't run, he didn't scream, he didn't cry. He matched his rhythm to the chaotic beat blaring on stage. His voice rose not with the gentle soul ballad he had started with, but an improvised fusion of jazz and electronic, something Melody Carter had practiced with him on quiet afternoons at home while seated beside the piano. The new rhythm stunned the entire room. Bit by bit, Jaylen absorbed the sabotage, twisting it into something alive, strange, and irresistibly powerful. Logan went pale. His two friends exchanged nervous glances behind him. The humiliation they had engineered had become an unstoppable performance. Monsieur Lopez stood up, tears spilling from her eyes, but a tight smile on her lips. She understood Jaylen had just proven that true talent cannot be silenced, not even when crushed by the blunt force of bias. As Jaylen neared the end, he spun the mic and lifted his voice above the chaotic music, and finished with a soft stomp on the wooden stage floor. Everything fell silent, 1 second, 2 seconds, and then the auditorium erupted, applause that wasn't out of politeness. It was thunderous, a release, a recognition. In the front row, Aiden Brooks, the privileged student who once stood beside Logan, was the first to rise. A 12-year-old boy, once dragged out as a joke, had just turned a stage of shame into an arena of freedom. Jaylen stepped off the stage to a wave of sustained applause, his legs still trembling from a performance he could barely believe he had pulled off. Each step felt like walking on waves, not waves of fame, but surges of something that had just been released from within his authentic voice. Backstage, Ms. Lopez rushed over and embraced him tightly. "You knew they were going to do something, didn't you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. Jaylen gave a slight nod. Logan said, "He had a surprise planned. I figured part of it out, but I never thought I'd turn it into music." He smiled a weary smile, but one no longer shaped by fear. "You did more than that, Jaylen," she said, gripping his shoulders with trembling cold hands. "You just made an entire school go silent to listen to a 12-year-old boy." At that very moment, the backstage door burst open. A group of students poured in, some with praise, some asking for photos, and even a few offering quiet apologies from those who had once ignored him in the hallway. Jaylen wasn't sure how to react. He smiled gratefully but cautiously. The feeling lasted only a few minutes, before a shadow slipped past him, unnoticed by anyone else. Logan Wright. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't angry. He looked at Jaylen with a chilling, unnervingly calm stare. As he passed, Logan leaned in and whispered just loud enough for only Jaylen to hear, "Enjoy it, because I promise, it won't last." Jaylen froze, not because of the threat itself, but because of Logan's tone. It didn't carry the impulsiveness typical of a teenager. It felt calculated, certain, dangerous. Before Jaylen could respond, Logan had vanished into the crowd like a ghost. That night, when Jaylen returned to the dorm, his room was strangely dark and quiet. Caleb, his soft-spoken roommate from Chicago, was still typing away at his laptop as usual. Jaylen was about to sit down when his phone buzzed. A notification from the school's social media account. A new video had been posted. He tapped it, and his heart skipped a beat. Title: The Truth About Jaylen Carter's Dubious Talent and Why His Mother Hid Him from the Spotlight. The footage showed Jaylen singing intercut with blurry old clips of his mother, Melody Carter, performing songs with a similar melody. The caption below hit like a direct blow. No surprise, the kid's just copying his mom. Record labels passed on him for lack of originality. Fake talent, charity project. Jaylen was stunned. Logan hadn't just attacked him on stage, he had brought the assault online to a place where audiences didn't need truth and didn't care to verify it. His phone started buzzing non-stop, dozens of messages, hundreds of comments. Shares are multiplying by the minute. Jaylen stared at the screen, not because of the view count, but because he had truly believed the battle was over. That night, Jaylen couldn't sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, the words from that video flooded back like crashing waves. Nothing but the Carter name. If he wasn't Melody's son who would care, the scholarship kid propped up as a fake role model. His hands began to tremble not out of fear, but helplessness. Everything he had poured into that stage, every real emotion, every ounce of his identity. It was now buried under hundreds of shares of a cruelly edited video. Jaylen turned off his phone. He tried not to cry, but his throat tightened like stones lodged behind his voice. Across the room, Caleb kept typing. No words, no glances. Only when Jaylen finally buried his face into the desk did Caleb quietly speak. "My dad's a defamation lawyer." Jaylen lifted his head, eyes still rimmed red. What Caleb didn't take his eyes off the screen. "And I know how to trace IP addresses, track upload origins, and prove the source of false information." Jaylen said nothing. He had never expected help from his quiet roommate. Caleb finally looked him in the eye. "I saw you sing. I know what Logan's doing is over the line. If you want to fight back, I'm here." Jaylen felt like someone had just pulled him up from under the water. The next day, when he walked into class, the way people looked at him had shifted. Some avoided him. Some whispered. But a few, for the first time, nodded in acknowledgement. Something was moving, slowly, but genuinely. That afternoon, Ms. Lopez called Jaylen into the music room. On her desk was a thick file. Her laptop was open to an admin dashboard. "You remember I'm the advisor for the school journalism club, right?" she asked. Jaylen nodded. She tapped the screen lightly. "I've recorded all the student council meetings for documentation over the past 3 years. And guess who speaks the most in all those recordings?" Jaylen remained silent. "Logan Wright," she answered for him. "There are clips of him discussing grade manipulation, suppressing scholarship students, and even coercing a student into withdrawing a bullying complaint." She leaned toward Jaylen, eyes shining. "You're not the only one I've got. I've got a system." Jaylen looked at the file, a small part of him long convinced he was alone. "Suddenly, I saw the outline of an invisible network starting to take shape. Not everyone at Westmore had looked the other way. And then, a knock on the door. Aiden Brooks, the once privileged student who had supported Logan, walked in. He looked at Jaylen with a different expression. No arrogance, no fear, only one thing: remorse. "I've got the original messages," Aiden said. "The whole group chat. Logan, he said outright he was going to ruin you. Said, we need to crush him before anyone finds out he's better than us." Jaylen said nothing. He looked at the white boy who had once clapped when Logan mocked him in the hallway, now handing over evidence as a form of atonement. Ms. Lopez nodded. "Now we just need one more thing," she said, her eyes gleaming. Jaylen tilted his head. "What is it?" She smiled. "Timing." 3 days after the video scandal, Westmore Academy announced an emergency meeting between the student council and the school administration. Invitations were sent to all students, teachers, and parents who had attended the recent talent show. Presiding over the meeting, Logan Wright, president of the student council. Purpose: discuss cases of fraud and ethical violations in the recent talent competition. Logan's message circulated rapidly across internal chat groups. "He thinks he won. Let me show him what the real Westmore standard looks like." The meeting was held in the main auditorium, the same stage where Jaylen had sung and shaken the hearts of the entire school. But today the spotlight wasn't there to celebrate. It was there to expose. Logan walked up to the podium clad in a custom-tailored light grey blazer, his tie adjusted to the millimeter. Every step whispered the same message: I'm still in control. Principal Bennett offered a faint smile, her eyes betraying apparent favoritism. Logan began, "We have evidence suggesting that certain performances during the talent competition used unauthorized technology to enhance presentation, misleading the audience, judges, and student body." His gaze slid to the back row where Jaylen sat still and composed hands on his lap, back straight eyes unblinking. Therefore, Logan continued, "I propose a full investigation into Jaylen Carter's performance." The room began to murmur. But before Logan could cue the display of his so-called evidence, the auditorium doors swung open. Everyone turned. A black man in his 50s entered, dressed in a dignified but straightforward suit. Jerome Matthews, a Grammy-winning music producer, is Jaylen's godfather. Chairs shifted as people recognized him. Some students pulled out their phones to take pictures. Even Principal Bennett stood abruptly, stammering, "Mr. Matthews, we're honored by your presence." Jerome gave a subtle nod. "Ms. Lopez invited me for a particular reason." He stepped to the center of the stage. No microphone was needed. His voice carried the authority of someone who had once commanded recording studios and global arenas. "Last week, I watched a video that had gone viral, a boy's voice I've known since he was 3. I watched it over and over and realized something was off." Jerome looked directly at Logan, then gave a signal to Ms. Lopez. She turned on the projector. The screen showed the original unedited video of Jaylen's performance, including the moment the audio was sabotaged, and the boy's extraordinary response. The entire auditorium held its breath. Then, the footage shifted to security camera recordings. Logan and his 2 friends were sneaking into the tech booth, tampering with audio wires and lighting systems. Gasps rippled across the room. Principal Bennett's face turned pale. Logan stood frozen. The cameras were installed after last year's equipment vandalism, Ms. Lopez calmly explained. "We only reviewed the footage this morning." The screen changed again, showing screenshots of a group chat between Logan and his friends. A highlighted message appeared against a black background in stark white letters. "We need to crush this black kid before anyone realizes he's better than us." The room exploded. Principal Bennett looked stunned. Teachers whispered among themselves. A parent stood up and demanded a full review of the student council's operations. Logan stammered, That's out of context, manipulated." But his voice had lost all weight. Jerome turned to Jaylen, his eyes warm. "Do you want to say something, son?" Jaylen stood. The 12-year-old looked around the hall, not afraid, not angry, just calm. The calm of someone who knew exactly who he was. "I don't need anyone to speak for me," Jaylen said, his voice clear and steady. "I just want to be heard without the noise or bias." He turned to Logan, now standing like a statue. "Thank you for allowing me to prove that I'm not someone's child living in the shadow of a star. I am my person." The meeting dissolved into chaos. Logan Wright was ordered to leave the auditorium immediately. No one patted his back. No one laughed with him, not even those who had once joined in mocking Jaylen. Only turned faces and cold footsteps retreating from the burn zone. By the next morning, a special disciplinary board, summoned by the district's senior officials, was established. All evidence submitted by Ms. Lopez and Jaylen was reviewed publicly. There were no more denials. 3 days later, Logan was suspended indefinitely and removed from all student council positions. His Harvard scholarship was revoked. 2 other private universities said they were re-evaluating his admissions due to ethical concerns. His Instagram account was deactivated after receiving thousands of backlash comments. Rumors spread. Logan's father, a high-profile CEO, was questioned by shareholders over family values and social responsibility. Logan was later seen leaving the family mansion with 2 suitcases and was transferred to a military boarding school in Arizona. Meanwhile, Westmore Academy would never be the same. all across school bulletin boards and the official school social media page. Principal Bennett was forced to sign a public pledge for internal reform, which included the creation of an independent response board for scholarship students, a strict ban on unauthorized recording or dissemination of videos on campus, a special parent-teacher forum on recognizing bias, privilege, and racism in education. Most importantly, Principal Bennett was investigated by the school district for favoritism and cover-ups. Jaylen received the news in silence. He didn't celebrate. He didn't win in the way others might think. He just felt a little less small in the school that had once swallowed him whole. That afternoon, as Jaylen sat alone in the music room, replaying the demo of Invisible Roots, Ms. Lopez entered holding a thick envelope. This boy created more than just a song, she smiled. Do you know what Jerome Matthews just sent you? Jaylen shook his head. She opened the envelope. Inside was the official poster for the launch of his debut album, Jaylen Carter. Invisible Roots below, it was the logo of Jerome's record label, and the words, nationwide release this coming spring. Jaylen froze. His teacher sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Now you're no longer branded, she said. Not the son of, not the scholarship kid, not the joke. Now you are Jaylen Carter, the first artist of your generation at Westmore. Jaylen was quiet for a moment. Then he whispered, but I don't want to be remembered, just for being bullied. Ms. Lopez nodded, eyes filled with profound faith. Then show them. You're also the reason everything changed. There was no red carpet, no paparazzi, no sensational press or LED-lit stage production. Invisible Roots, Jaylen Carter's debut album, launched on a quiet Saturday afternoon at Jerome Matthews' old recording studio in Oakland. In this space, every sound wave had once been captured by heart, not viral metrics. Only 27 guests were invited close friends. Ms. Lopez, Aidan Brooks, Caleb, a few parents who had once spoken out against Logan. And most importantly, Melody Carter, Jaylen's mother, had just returned from her international tour. She sat quietly in the corner of the room, saying little. She watched her son, who once hid under tables when classmates called him a parasite, living off his mum's fame, now stepping onto a small stage in a white button-down shirt, his eyes no longer evasive. Jaylen stood before the microphone. He didn't read from a prepared speech. No dramatics, no background music. He just spoke. This album wasn't made to prove I have talent. It was made for something simpler because I once thought staying silent would make everything pass. But silence isn't always safe. Sometimes silence is just agreeing with what's wrong. No one moved in the room. Jaylen continued each word, rising from deep inside his chest. I'm not here because of who I'm related to. I'm here because I stepped onto that stage, knowing they might laugh. And if anyone in that auditorium that day felt as lost as I did, I hope they hear this song and know we have roots. Invisible but unshakable. He smiled and turned to his mother, who looked at him not with worry but with silent pride. The entire room stood in applause. No one sobbed, but many wiped tears from their eyes. That evening, Invisible Roots was released online. No marketing campaign, no PR rollout. Yet within 72 hours, it broke into the top 10 of Spotify's Soul Jazz chart for new artists. 3 months later, Jaylen Carter was nominated for 2 Grammy Awards. Best New Artist. Album with the most powerful social message. In an interview with Rolling Stone, when asked about Logan Wright and the Westmore incident, Jaylen answered, I'm not grateful for being bullied. No one should be, but I'm grateful to myself for not letting it define me. 3 years later, the grand auditorium of Westmore Academy lit up once more. But this time, no one was forced to sing, no one was secretly recorded to be mocked. There were no snickers behind backs, no scrutinizing stares at last names deemed unworthy. That day, the stage belonged to Jaylen Carter, this time as an honorary guest speaker at graduation, inspiring hundreds of students about to enter the world. No longer the small 12-year-old boy. Now 15, Jaylen stood like someone who had weathered storms and returned carrying light. His gaze no longer dodged contact. His voice, still warm and deep, now carried weight, purpose. Jaylen walked up to the podium. He looked at the front row where his mother sat. Ms. Lopez sat, and Caleb and Aiden sat, and even some who had once stayed silent but now stood up. Further back sat students of color, Asian and Latinx kids, scholarship recipients, and those with unfamiliar names, all looking at him as if he were part of their future. He didn't need to glance at a script, because what he was about to say, he had lived. 3 years ago, I stood on this stage not because I was invited, but because I was pushed out. They didn't think I'd sing. They were sure I'd fall. But I found my voice, and when the music started, I realized no one gets to define you if you already know who you are. He paused. The room was silent, hanging on his every word. We live in a world obsessed with labels. Whose kid are you? What color are you? Are you a charity case? But what they don't understand is, roots don't need to be displayed. We carry them in our blood, in our voice, in the choice not to run. His voice began to crack. I'm not here to say I won. I'm here because I'm no longer afraid. And if one day you find yourself standing on any stage, whether it's a classroom, a job interview, or life itself, sing. Even if they tell you to be quiet, speak. Even if they won't listen. Because when you live by your roots, no prejudice is deep enough to bury you. Thunderous applause erupted, not for fame, but for a truth spoken by someone once misdefined. That day, Westmore Academy made 2 official announcements. The annual talent showcase would be renamed the Raíces Festival, inspired by invisible roots. A new Jaylen Carter Scholarship would be established, dedicated to students bullied or from marginalized communities. As Jaylen stepped off the stage, he turned back one last time. The auditorium that had once shaped his fears had now become the place that engraved his voice. And in his heart, there was only one truth. It wasn't talent that defeated prejudice. It was the courage to hold on to himself when everyone else tried to make him let go.